Hello, welcome to Vision Speak. This is a channel where we talk on faith, purpose, and self-development. Faith, purpose, and self-development. So, if this channel has been a blessing to you, please kindly like, share, subscribe because I know that this content is going to be amazing. So, today I want to talk on a topic which is on the journey into the promised land. The journey into the promised land. I know that for the Christian folks, you must have heard about the promised land, and we all know that promised land does sound like the story of the Israelites when they left the land of Egypt, then God took them into their land flowing with milk and honey. That's the land of Canaan, Jebusite, the Perizzite, and every one of those lands that they were able to conquer. Now, the promise, when they say promise, that means that there was what was actually attached to that name, promise, actually meant that there was a time that God actually made a covenant with Abraham in the Bible. And we know Abraham as the father of faith. So it was this time that God called Abraham from his father's house and told him that, get out of your father's house, I'm taking you to a land. And Abraham did not even know where God was actually taking him to, but he obeyed God and he followed God. And that was when God began to prove himself and to show himself to who he was going to make Abraham to be and how mighty his seed were going to be on the earth. And it got to a time that Abraham was waiting for a child, and after 25 years of waiting, that was when God actually answered him at his old age. And over the years, as the child grew, God said that I want to test Abraham. And God gave him this instruction that go and sacrifice that only son that you have. That must have been so heartbreaking because imagine waiting till when you're 100 years old before you give birth to your only child, and God now also requesting that I want that same child. So that must have been a very demanding situation for Abraham, but he kept on and actually obeyed God. And Abraham obeyed God. And when Abraham was about to sacrifice his child, that's when God showed up. And God made the covenant to Abraham. He said, in blessing, I will bless you, multiply you. And there are many blessings that will multiply see like the stars of the earth. That shows that God already promised Abraham that someday your seed are going to be mighty. So now the children of Israel, after like 400 years, the children of Israel have grown so mighty in the land of Egypt that they were so terrorized because the Pharaoh that was the king then, they don't know who Joseph was, because in the time of Joseph was able to have a deep relationship with the Pharaoh at that time because he was the prime minister. But the Bible says that when the king that knew not Joseph was on the throne, said the people of Israel actually suffered. And it got to a time that it was not time for them to actually fulfill this prophecy that God actually given to them. And God had to send a deliverer. Now, I'm just giving a background story so you can understand what the promised land actually means. Now, relating it to the contemporary times, the promised land for us as Christians is not just a physical location that God has said that, oh, you are taking Australia or you are taking North America for the, like, maybe that's where God actually sending you to. What I'm trying to say is that it's not like a geotag that God has promised you that I'm going to give you this land. But the promised land for the content of the video means that it's a future that God has actually prepared for each and every one of his children. The promised land is a future that God has actually promised to each and every of his children here on earth. Now, when you look at the Bible in the book of Jeremiah chapter 29 verse 11, the NIV version, it says that, for I know the plans that I have towards you. It said there are plans of hope and not to harm you. He said there are plans to prosper you and to give you a good future. So it's just amazing that God, who is awesome, actually have plans for us. And those plans are great and mighty plans. He says that as far as the heavens are to the earth, so are my ways higher than ways and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. So it's always amazing that anytime I get to choose my own plan, I choose something that is far lesser than what God actually has for me. So the promised land is a future that God actually prepared for us. Means that it's more of like a plan that God has laid for us, more of like a written scroll that God actually wants us to work with. And I want to say this, that most people actually struggle with God's plan because they either ignorant of the plans of God, or they refuse or abandon the plans of God. These are people that know it. They know the will of God, know that the plans that God has for them, but they refuse it. And the third category are those that are trying to modify the purpose of God for their lives. So I'll repeat that again. There are those that actually what they are ignorant about the purpose of God. The people that actually, second one are those that actually refuse or abandon the purpose of God. The third one are those the ones that are trying to modify. When someone, the Bible says in the book of Hosea chapter 4 verse 6 says that my people actually perish because they lack understanding. They lack the right information. They lack the right knowledge of who God has called them to be. So when you are not being equipped with the right information, you tend to suffer loss. You tend to suffer loss. There are many persons that they've lived the life of regret because they've not been able to acquire the right knowledge they are meant to acquire. Now, another thing why people actually struggle with the plans of God for life is that they either refuse or modify. No, they either refuse or they abandon the plans of God, the purpose of God. Now, let me give you an instance. When you look at the life of Jonah in the Bible, Jonah was a man who was a prophet. God had called him, and God wanted to destroy the land of Nineveh. And God, in His mercy, He doesn't want anybody to perish at all. So He told Jonah that these people, I don't want to destroy them. I love them so much. Just go to them. I don't want you to go to them and go and preach to them. But Jonah was very reluctant because that what else of him going to talk to when he knows that God, in His mercy, is going to forgive them. So maybe Jonah was really like trying to avoid. He doesn't just want to go there at all. So this man developed an escape plan that he was going to refuse God's plan and abandon it and go and seek his own life pursuit. So he left where he was and took a ship to Tarshish. On the way to Tarshish, that was when the storm arose. And Jonah, because of what actually happened on the sea, the people had to what? He said that it was the cause of the whole storm on the sea. And people said that, okay, what are they going to do? He said that they should throw him off the boat and throw him into the sea. So for someone to like suggested that, oh, that I'm the cause of your doom. And that said that throw me off. It means that he was trying to abandon God's plan. He was just trying to not go to where God actually sent him to. And God in His mercy actually prepared the way to actually swallow Jonah up. And for 3 days, he was in the belly of the whale, asking God for mercy, and God was able to forgive him. And later, he was able to get to do God's instruction. So there are many persons that they are actually refusing the purpose of God for their lives, or they are trying to abandon it. And the third category are those that are trying to modify the purposes or the plans of God for their life. They are trying to modify it. Now, this actually stems from the place of maybe jealousy or from the place of comparison. You are trying to compare yourself to others. Let's say, for instance, someone is doing something and you're like, oh, that this person is doing this thing. I don't have this particular thing. Let me try to copy him. Let me try to be like him. But every man has their own strength. Every man has their own grace that God actually incubed them. You know that when you look at the story of the talents in the Bible, God gave each, let me say, the master rather gave each of the servants talent based on their abilities. So now imagine someone that has 2 talents comparing himself to someone that has 5 talents, but they still actually receive the same reward because both of the ones that actually received 5 and the ones that received 2, they worked that and they doubled what they had. Now, there are some persons that they are trying to live a life that God actually called them to be. That's them actually trying to modify the purpose or the plans of God for their life. Now, let's look at the aquatic world for instance. Now, there are 2 kinds of catfish. We have the freshwater catfish and we have the saltwater catfish. The funny thing is that a freshwater catfish cannot survive in a saltwater. A freshwater catfish cannot survive in a saltwater because of the high level of salt concentration. Because of the high level of salt concentration. So that's how it also relates to be as human. We can actually survive in a habitat that God has actually called us to function in. When we try to modify the plans and purposes of God, we tend to struggle. So now moving on, I would like to say that the journey into the promised land, it involved three things. The journey into promised land involved three things, and these three things are the determinant factor whether we are going to live to actually see the plans and purposes of God that God has for us. Now, the thing is that the first thing that actually involves the journey to promised land is our consecration. It involves our consecration. Now, when we hear the word consecration, consecration means that being set apart for an higher cause. Being set apart for an higher cause. Let me use the story of the Israelites for instance. Now, them to actually were consecrated unto God. When you look at how God actually brought them out from the land of bondage into their land of freedom, into their promised land, into a land that fresh flows milk and honey. Now, where they were in the land of Egypt, they were serving as slaves, bearing burdens, bearing yokes, serving as menial servants, and just doing things that just to eat. That's all. They never thought of inheritance. All they thought was just to eat to survive. So they were having this kind of mentality, and then God called them and called him unto his own. That was the higher cause. I see that consecration means that being set apart for an higher purpose. So now God actually called them out from the land of Egypt, means that they were actually consecrated unto God. Now, as believers, our consecration starts from the point of salvation. That's when we come to Jesus. That's when God actually takes us from the yoke of the bondage of sin and brings us into his righteousness, brings us into a place of love, brings us out from the place of guilt, from the place of shame, and brings us into the place of receiving the newness of life. So it's very important that we get to keep our consecration, because when you keep your consecration, it makes you available and also useful for God, because you become a worthy vessel that God can actually work with and work in and work through. Now, how does a man keep his consecration? How does a man keep his consecration? The first thing is that a man keep his consecration when he's being devoted to the things of God. A man keep his consecration when he's being devoted to the things of God. When you look at an idol worshiper, for instance, someone actually worship an idol knows that he doesn't joke with his set of instructions that have been given to him. He doesn't joke with it at all, because he knows that the devil doesn't take rubbish. For those that are actually in the dark world, they dare not, rather, not to make any silly mistake. So whatsoever their idol has given to them, they must do it. Even maybe, let's say for instance, they have to offer a sacrifice at their shrine, or they have to do some crazy things they have to do. So it means that they are devoted to worshiping, even though maybe devoted to chanting their idols, the gods. They will love to, they have to chant their name. It means that they are devoted into what? Into chanting. So as Christians, we have to be devoted to things of God, in place of service, in place of coming to know the fullness of God. It's not just saying that you are devoted to things of God. It must be something that can be seen, that this man actually devoted to things of God, from the way he talks, from the way he tried to do the things that are pleasing unto God, from his actions. You can see that someone is truly devoted, is a devoted Christian, is committed to living a life of purpose, living a life that is of faith, is a faithful steward. Means that he's committed to fulfilling his responsibilities. That's being devoted. And that is that, how can we know that a man can keep his consecration? Is that a man keeps consecration when he is obedient to God. When he is obedient to God. Now, when it comes to consecration, there are instructions that are being given. There are pathways. Now, when you look at the people of Israel, God called them out and gave them the 10 commandments. So it means that God was actually expecting them to live a life of obedience. That's why it's actually important. When you look at the life of Samson in the Bible, this was a promised child, because his parents has waited for years, and then God came through his angel and sent his angel to Manoah and told them that he's going to give him a child. That child is going to be a deliverer, and he gave them a consecration that a razor must not come on this child's hair. So now, Samson was a man that when the purpose of God was fulfilled, he was working in the purpose and purpose of God, And then it goes to them that he defiled his consecration. He got into adultery, into the laps of Delilah, and then that was how he was able to divulge his consecration. So there are some persons that our consecration at times is personal. What someone might be keeping as his own consecration by faith from what someone else is keeping as his own consecration. So it's very important that you get to know what God has called you apart. It can be, for instance, God can tell you that, oh, your consecration is that you must be praying every time. Means that you are devoted to something. You can say that you must maybe you must not be eating some certain type of food, or he can tell you that these set of friends that are working with you must not work with them. So God can give you some set of instructions. Those are consecrations. So it's very important that you get to know what God has actually called you to, so that you can follow his principles. And you see that whenever we get to live a life of obedience, we get to enjoy the fullness of God. When you live a life of obedience, you get to enjoy the good of the land, because you are faithful to the instructions, to the promises that God has actually laid in line for us. So I say that journey to promised land is a journey that actually involves our consecration. And another thing is that the journey to promised land involves our knowing God. The journey to promised land involves our knowing God. Oh, knowing God is not just coming out from the place of saying that, I know God by books, I know God by information. Just by saying that, I just have an understanding of who God is, but it's you actually experiencing God Himself. Experiencing God Himself. When you also look at the people of Israel, they had different experiences of God. God was actually giving them different expression of who He was. Now, even starting from when they were in land of bondage, that was in Egypt, God actually showed signs to the people of the Egypt by what? By actually sending 10 plagues to them. So that was God actually showing them signs that He's the I am that I am, He's the all supreme being. And when they got to the Red Sea, them actually expressing that another dimension of who God is as one that can actually part the Red Sea. That was them actually what? Conceiving who the personality of who God is. And then when they got out of the Red Sea into that person on their journey, God was actually showing them things. Was He had to lead them by fire through the night, He had to lead them by pillar of cloud by day. So that was God actually showing forth Himself. Now, when you look at the book of Psalm, I think Psalm 103 was saying, God was saying that my ways I made unto Moses, and my acts to the children of Israel. My ways I made known unto Moses, and my acts to the children of Israel. So that shows that we can actually experience God by His ways or by His acts. We can experience God by His ways or by His acts. When we experience God by His ways, when we need to read our Bible, we fellowship with Him in place of prayer, in place of intimacy, we tend to obey His commandments and instructions that He has given unto us. We are good stewards and all. And that's when you say that you get to experience God by His act. Like I said, people of vision actually experience God by His act, because God was actually showing Himself. This is more of like a tangible experience of God. For instance, someone who was actually battling with a terminal illness, and then God manifesting His power, and that person was healed miraculously. Now that person actually experienced the act of God. That means that they experience the power of God. So people who actually experience the act of God, they don't need to cajole them about who God is, because they've experienced it. So we can experience God by His act or by His ways. So now moving on, I have said about like the three determinant factor on how that can help us to get into our promised land. I said that our consecration, knowing God, and the last thing is also walking in purpose. Walking in purpose. God has called everyone into a life of purpose. I do have this thing that I used to like kind of meditate upon, that we were actually sent on earth to meet Him. That means that we are actually made with a purpose, and God actually wants us to actually walk in that purpose. The beautiful thing is that God doesn't actually reveals the processes that are actually involved in we actually fulfilling the plans that He has for us at a time. It doesn't say that, I have this purpose for you. Although God can actually show you that, like you are going somewhere. Maybe God are showing that maybe for instance you had a dream, and in that dream God showed you that, you were talking to world leaders, that shows that God is actually taking you to a place of leadership. But God is not going to show you the processes that are actually involved in getting there at once. One thing that God does is that God actually brings us into seasons to know Him and to also experience Him. Now, when I say that God does not actually show us His processes at once, let's look at the story of Joseph in the Bible. God actually showed him that he was going to be a great man, and he had different. We call him Joseph the dreamer. Rather, it means that he has had dreams of his siblings and his family bowing down before him, the sons and the stars and all. So this guy had a great destiny. But now imagine God has showed him what the process was going to involve while he was actually telling him who he has made him to be, who he has called him to be. That okay, he's going to be betrayed by his brothers. When he gets to where he was being sold out to because he was betrayed, his master's wife is going to also lie against him. He's going to be in jail for a good number of years. If you're the one that they told that, I believe that you said that no, I don't want that future again. But God doesn't actually reveal those way for. But all God does is He brings us into seasons by time, per time. And in those seasons, that's where you get to learn God. That's where you get to learn the things that God actually wants you to know. That's where you get to know what God actually wants for you. I also say that when we begin to walk in purpose, we need to shine as light. And God has called us to be light because we are more of like a city set upon a which cannot be hidden. So God wants us to shine as light. And when we shine as light, God is much more glorified. When we shine as light, God is much more glorified. I also say that when we shine as light, we become pointers to the wonders of God. When we shine as light, we become pointers to the works of God, to the wonders of God. Let's use this illustration for instance. You want to visit a museum and then you've purchased your tickets and then you got into the museum. When you're getting into the museum, the lights suddenly trip off. You've not been able to capture the creativity, the artifact, the art, the sculptures, the paintings on the walls and everything. You've not been able to see them. Now, once the light is being restored, you begin to see that wow, this thing is so beautiful. Look at this sculpture, look at this painting. You begin to appreciate the creativity, you begin to appreciate the mastery that was involved, you begin to appreciate the skillfulness, you begin to appreciate the intelligence that was actually being displayed in actually conceiving those thoughts and bringing those thoughts into full expression, that people can actually appreciate the beauty of it. So that means that when you begin to shine as light, look at that time that the light actually was restored. That was when we begin to appreciate the things that was actually around. So in this dark world, people will not be able to appreciate who God is as long as you are not actually shining forth as light. But once you begin to shine as light, become pointers to the wonders of God, to the transformation that God has done through you and with your life. Now there are some persons that their life have been so bad that God was able to transform them. I was hearing an excerpt from a video about a minister of God. This man was someone who was a cultist while he was in school. So in his final year, he got involved in examination malpractice, and because of that, he had to be suspended. And you know the consequence of actually being involved in an examination malpractice. It means that it can lead in expulsion. That means that like the 4 years or the 5 years you've actually used in school is totally a waste. So this man, his mom was begging money that you should please just have mercy, just tamper mercy with judgment. And no, they're like, God. And they told this man to go home. And him being a court leader, he was devastated. So he had to go home. So he was just in the process of was going through a lot, going through depression. On this fateful day, his pastor came around and preached to him and told him that there's actually a way out in Jesus. Just preach Jesus to him. He just preached Jesus to him. And then that was how God touched him. And later on, he started moving on with the things of God, started knowing God, started working in obeying God in prayers and reading his Bible. And God gave him a word. And when God gave him that word, he heard on that word. He was praying and confessing that word daily. Weeks passed, months passed. He said like up to like 8 months. He was receiving, because God gave him a word that he was going to be restored. So it was confessing that word. Even that word didn't seem as if it was coming to manifestation. He said on this faithful day, he said after like maybe I think 8 months, that was how someone came to knock on their door and said that, oh sir, we've been looking for you. And I said that the management have sat on a matter and they are willing to have mercy on you. Said that so they are willing to bring you back on campus and then you just have to write that final exam alone. And that was how God actually restored it. And looking at this man, is now someone who is being transformed, is living a life of purpose. So when you look at the past life of this man, you can say that that how come that God can actually transform this person to be someone who can be so useful for him. So there are many persons that they've lived a life that are not worthy to be talked about, but God is able to transform them. So God can actually work with anybody to get you to become what you actually want you to be. So I want you to know that your journey into promise actually involves what? Involves our consecration. It involves we actually what? Knowing God experientially. It also involves what? We working in purpose. Now in conclusion, God is an intentional being, is an intellectual being, and also is an supreme being. That means that God is not just careless or is not just passive about the promises that He actually has for you. It's our responsibility to come into we setting ourselves apart to know God, setting ourselves apart to walk in purpose, and through that we're going to what? We're going to know the plans that God has for us. We're going to walk into this fullness that God has for us. So I believe that God has great and mighty things for us as His children. He said, "For I know the thought that I think towards you." Said they are taught what to give you a hope and a great future. So God has so much thing in store for us as His children because He's intentional. He's so much a good God, and He loves us and He doesn't want us to just come and live life just anyhow. He wants us to live our life and live it a life of legacy that people can see that this person that actually lived a life of purpose on earth. So I believe this will actually blessed you. So if you have not subscribed, please kindly do that. Also like, share, and comment. So thank you and God bless you.